Welcome to this Whole Life Action Hour. Today, we're going to focus on the joy of healthy cooking. Knowing how to cook nourishing, delicious food is an essential survival skill. And it's a skill that anybody can learn, especially when you have a skillful teacher. In this action hour, we're going to be speaking with award-winning chef and best-selling author Bryant Terry as we look at how you can make your cooking experience more joyful, more pleasurable, more creative, and more healthy. You're going to find out some of Bryant's top favorite tools and tips and ideas for cooking whole plant foods and building creative meals at home. We're going to look at how to broaden your palate by feeding in some of the wisdom of diverse cultural traditions. And we're going to look at how you can take your culinary joy to new heights. So now I want to be very clear, as we are with all of our action hours, that nothing you hear today is medical advice. This is coaching. We're sharing our own best insights. But of course, you should always consult a qualified healthcare professional for your medical issues and needs. That said, you are going to learn a lot today. This is a project of Whole Life Club, which is Food Revolution Network's ongoing membership community. And some of the questions that I'll be bringing to this interview come from our Whole Life Club members. So without further ado, let me introduce Bryant Terry. He's a James Beard and NAACP Image Award-winning chef, educator, and author. He's renowned for his activism to create a healthy, just, and sustainable food system. San Francisco Magazine included Bryant among its 11 smartest people in the Bay Area food scene. Fast Company named him one of 9 people who are changing the future of food. Since 2015, he's been the chef in residence at the Museum of the African Diaspora in San Francisco, where he creates public programming at the intersection of food, farming, health, activism, art, culture, and the African diaspora. Bryant is the author of acclaimed cookbooks such as Vegetable Kingdom, Vegan Soul Kitchen, Afro Vegan, and the forthcoming amazing must-read book, Black Food. And personally, I've known Bryant for probably 15 or 20 years now. He actually came into my world as a chef, as I was helping to organize transformational events for young leaders from around the world. Bryant cooked at many of those events, wound up becoming a leader in those events. He was a chef, but he also was actually an incredible convener, facilitator, and space holder for the transformational conversations we were holding. And since then, he's gone on to write all these books and become such a leader in the food space. Bryant, it's so good to see you again.
Great to see you, Ocean. Thank you so much for having me on. And I just want to publicly thank you for the support that you've shown me for close to 2 decades now. And when I was young and green, you believed in me, you trusted me, you brought me in to collaborate. And that practice that I had in public of cooking in bulk and feeding people who are in these sacred spaces has been invaluable to the way that I think about food and the way that I create these spaces. And I just want you to know that.
Thank you. I'm so glad and so proud of all that you have done, and so honored that you would share some of your wisdom with our audience here today. So Bryant, tell us what got you into food, and especially into healthy food. What were the kind of formative influences that lit this fire in you?
Sure. I have to start by talking about my family. And my family is the foundation upon which, all the work that I've done stands. And, I always say that the work that I've been doing for the past 2 decades is simply me sharing many of the lessons that I learned as a child, spending time with my grandparents. Mostly, they had roots in rural Mississippi and Tennessee and Arkansas, but they moved to Memphis, and I grew up in the same, I grew up in Memphis, and my grandparents brought with them, moving from the rural South to the urban South, they brought with them their survival skills, agrarian knowledge, their desire, not just desire, but their understanding of the importance, the necessity of growing one's own food. And I always say, my grandfather, used to tell me that when we rely on other people to feed us, the moment that they decide they don't want to, then we'll starve. And he often would share these early lessons in self-determination and ensuring that we can, feed our communities and care for our communities. And it's interesting going back to that neighborhood now, because I feel like it's almost a shell of itself. This is a largely working class Black neighborhood adjacent to downtown Memphis, where my grandparents lived. And, from my paternal grandfather's urban, it was more than a garden. It was an urban farm. Every bit of available space he was using to produce food, from walnut trees to pecan trees to growing muscadine grapes to a whole section of every imaginable dark leafy green. I grew up eating a very diverse diet. The type of diet that I suggested people should move towards, one that's rooted in food that's local, that's sustainably grown, that is in season. This was a type of food that I grew up eating. We literally, we were eating as local as our backyard garden. We always ate what was in season, and oftentimes we would literally harvest food right before preparing it. And so I think about that, and then just this shift when I got to high school because of peer pressure and just wanting to fit in with a lot of my buddies on the football team who were overdoing it with the fast food and the processed food. Because the mantra back then was, you got to bulk up, you got to gain as much weight as possible, you got to be a beefy guy so you can run over everyone. And when I was in the 10th grade, I heard this song, a hip hop song called Beef by the rapper KRS-One.
Yes.
And this song was a major one in just changing everything for me. And I think it was so brilliant the way in which he talked about the impact of factory farming, not just on the animals, and that was a focus, but on human health, on the environment. And so it was hard to look back after that. It's just like when you have this, when the doors open and you see behind the curtain, it's hard to turn back. Most of my early influences in terms of plant-based eating, vegetarianism, veganism came from Black people. And it's important for me to say that because there's this perception that, eating plant-based diets, vegetarianism, veganism are, I think traditionally there's an idea that it was kind of like the practices of upper middle class white suburbanites. More recently, I think people imagine it's like the urban, gentrifiers who do that. But when we talk about Black folks, they aren't a part of the conversation. And I know this, it's not even theoretical. When I was shopping my second book, Vegan Soul Kitchen, around, the response that we got when 10 publishers rejected us was that you're cutting the pie too thinly. Do Black people, are there any Black vegans? Is that even a thing? They would often say, there's no way that this book is going to make any money because there's just the Venn diagram of Black people and vegans. There's just probably very little overlap. And I just want to say that now, in 2021, we know that African Americans are the fastest growing population of vegans in the US. There's so many Black folks, people of African descent, who were part of my formative years of thinking about practicing and writing about plant-based eating and lifestyles. And I want to illuminate them, and I want to uplift them and applaud them for being on the cutting edge and really helping to lead us into a more compassionate and healthful way of living as a people, when we know that, I guess we'll get into this a little later, but just the Black folks have some of the highest rates of preventable diet-related illnesses. We often live in communities where there's an overabundance of, meaty and dairy-filled fast foods and processed foods. So I just want to respect and honor the elders who have inspired me to do this work.
Absolutely. Thank you for all of that, Bryant. And, it is pretty heartening to see statistically right now, Black people are actually twice as likely to be vegan as white people in the United States. So that Venn diagram is expanding rapidly, and you are one of the elders now. People in future generations, I believe, will look at you in much the way that you're honoring the people that inspired you on the path. and you are helping to broaden and expand this movement. And really, in that, you're providing leadership not just to the Black community, but to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
So I thank you for that. I want to talk a little bit about food and culture, because wherever we come from has a lot to do with how we think about food, even how we taste food, what kinds of cuisines and spices. And, the United States has the very sad reality that if you think about what is American food, we think about maybe burgers and fries, or we think about hot dogs. But then we look to countries and other places around the world for ethnic cuisines that influence us. I don't really think I've traveled around the world and seen American restaurants. And if I did, it was McDonald's or something, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you are helping us to recognize the profound significance that culture can play in healthy eating traditions. And I'd love if you could speak a little bit about that, and about what are some of the key cultural influences that you think could help all aspiring healthy eaters to enjoy their food lives more.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting when you say that, people often have a hard time kind of pinning down, well, what is American food? And I feel like African-American cuisine should be at the top of the list. It should be driving the conversation about what is American food. I would argue that African-American cuisine is the original modern global fusion cuisine. If you think about the way in which it brings together, ingredients and flavor profiles and cooking techniques and staple ingredients from West and Central Africa, and then how those intermingled with food of the Americas, and then the influence that European food and traditions and flavor profiles had. And so I want people to challenge themselves to move past the vilification of Black food. And, I think about like this term soul food, right? And how most often when people hear that term soul food, what in their mind, what they're thinking is African-American cuisine. Like that's what Black people eat, soul food. And that term, just the term soul in and of itself, I feel like is always fascinating to me, because if you ask a dozen people what it means, you likely get a dozen different answers. And, in many ways, I'm not interested in concretizing that term as much as I am in helping us think about its expansiveness. And I really want us to, I want to challenge all of us to sit with the expansiveness of the term soul, because I find that, it's often when we talk about soul food, I found that people reduce that term or that idea of what Black people eat to two things. One are the antebellum survival foods upon which many African Americans had to rely. The problem with kind of making that a blanket picture of what Black folks eat or have eaten historically is that the institution of slavery wasn't a monolith. Yes, in parts of the Black Belt, Mississippi, Tennessee, Arkansas, it was a more paternalistic and repressive system where every need of enslaved Africans was provided by plantation owners: their food, their clothing, their shelter. But the institution of slavery looked different in different parts of the South. In the coastal Carolinas, it looked different than it did in Louisiana. It looked different than it did in the Caribbean. And so just to kind of paint it as, Black food is like, that's slave food, as it's often described, which I prefer the term survival food when you think about the ingenuity and creativity that those who did have to just take the internal animal viscera or the worst discards of the vegetables and, create something that was delicious and nourishing. But we know, in coastal Carolinas or the Caribbean or the Louisiana, that enslaved Africans might have a Sunday off where they can actually tend to the kitchen garden for their family and not just for the production of the farm. They might be able to hunt for animals to supplement their protein. So I want people to understand that. The other way in which people kind of talk so simplistically about Black food is they often talk about, soul food, which they imagine as Black food, as the kind of big flavored meats, the overcooked vegetables, the sugary desserts that one might find at a soul food restaurant.
Right.
And there's a whole history behind that. But I guess what I'm getting at is that I don't reject any of these parts of this larger, more diverse and complex African-American cuisine. Because yeah, Black folks eat chitlins. They eat the animal viscera. That's a tradition that a lot of Black Southerners have. You know, a lot of people enjoy the type of food that you would find at a soul food restaurant, from, you know, messy ribs to fried chicken to red velvet cake to cooked for 10-hour collard greens. And I think that food can be beautiful in of itself as well for celebrations and holidays and special occasions, certainly not for everyday, you know, thriving. But what I would love for people to focus on is this part of our culture that is so often erased or ignored. And that is this, going back to what I talked about earlier, these agrarian traditions of growing our own food. When you talk about the type of food that my family, my Black family, prepared by my Black grandfather and my Black maternal grandmother, who made all the food on my mom's side, the dark, nutrient rich dark leafy greens like collards, mustards, turnips, kale, dandelions, the, you know, things like black-eyed peas, sugar snap peas, pole beans, okra, sweet potatoes, butternut squash. These are Black foods. These are the type of country cooking, that foundational foods that you find in traditional Black foods throughout the South and beyond, as people have moved and migrated to other parts of the country. And so it's easy to kind of go along with the racist vilification of all things Black, but, you know, in this case, our food, without digging deeper. And I want to encourage everyone to do that, because the sad reality is it's not just the wider culture that has to be educated about the beauty and diversity and complexity of Black food. It's our people as well, because so many of us have been miseducated about these things. And you know, when we talk about the criteria for what's healthful, I think one of the things that I'd love to see on that list, at the top of the list actually, but certainly included, are cultural foods. What are our cultural foods? What are the foods that our grandparents and their parents were eating? You know, but the pre-standard American diet foods, the things that have sustained us for generations. And so, you know, when we talk about African Americans having some of the highest rates of preventable diet-related illnesses, I would argue that we needn't look any further than our own cultural foods, our foundational foods and our traditional diets, to find our own healing. And there are people who are talking about it. Old Ways, which is an organization that encourages all of us to think about how we can incorporate our you know, cultural foods into our diet, whether it's from Western Europe or Asia or, you know, sub-Saharan Africa. And so I want to push us all to do that. And I encourage you to check out the Old Ways website, because they have innumerable resources about these staples themselves, to traditional dishes, to cooking techniques that you can then take and, you know, really make this a part of your daily practice of cooking and eating.
Terrific. Thank you, Bryant. I want to move a little more to the culinary world for a minute now, if we can. I want to ask you about spices. Spice combinations often make a huge difference in the flavor of a dish. What are some of your favorite spice pairings?
Well, I will say my forks down favorite these days is, well, so I'm assuming some of your the listenership, readership, the folks who are part of the club have had Ethiopian food. If you haven't, the kind of foundational spice to Ethiopian and Eritrean cooking is bedber. And bedber is a combination of a number of spices. It has some heat in there, but you can, you know, modify how hot you'd like it. I use this stuff on everything, but my favorite thing to do, and you know, this is if folks are looking for a healthful snack, popcorn. I toss the bedber in popcorn, and it just like punches it up, adds so much flavor. But you know, soups, stews, I just find that it's one of those, you know, all-purpose spices that's able to kind of pivot in a number of directions. I have been doing a lot with a homemade curry blend that I make. And one of my favorite ways to have it is pairing it with cauliflower. I often see cauliflower, and cauliflower is flavorful. I think it can be, I won't say a blank palette, but it could be a less flavorful vegetable upon which we can, add all types of spices and herbs and, rubs to make it interesting. I really love that one. Uh, this is something that we're moving into, because in terms of everyday eating, I highly encourage people to eat in season. Listen to Mother Earth. The Earth is producing foods that are appropriate for different times of the year. In the summer, when it's hot and we're sweating a lot and we need to hydrate, you find things like tomatoes and cucumbers and watermelons, these high water fruits and vegetables. And during the winter, when we should probably be eating things that are more grounding and warming and help us to just really, kind of tuck into the colder months, the earth is producing things like root vegetables and tubers. And this is a time where I think we should be eating stews and legumes and things that are a little more grounding and warming. So that being said, we're moving into root vegetable season very soon. And I love the combination of maple syrup with a little fresh garlic, some salt, and maybe a little cumin. And I roast those. And it's just one of those, if you could boil a pot of water, you could make this dish. When you get home, you could pop those in the oven as you're, helping the kids or you're settling in, and then they'll be ready in a snap. And so those are three of the combinations that I've been playing with lately. But I do want to offer, because I know you are really hoping to impart some nuts and bolts tips and tools. When it comes to spices, I want to encourage people, one, if you can, to use whole spices. They're much fresher and have more punch than those that have been pre-ground, and probably sitting in the supermarket for 6 months or a year or more. If possible, locate a source for buying bulk spices so that you can actually get just enough. I can't even tell you. I think my mom still has a spice drawer with all types of spices from like the 1970s when I was a little kid in there. And, with plant-based eating, it is important to think about how you can build flavor and how you can, use herbs and spices to ensure that the food tastes delicious and complex. I think it's easy to throw some salt on a steak and pop it on the grill. And when I used to eat meat, yeah, that tasted good. But, I think that, obviously that's problematic. And we know that you can get that much flavor out of plant-based cooking. You just have to be patient and take your time with it. And I think we're going to talk about I'd love for us to talk about bulk cooking and some other tips that I have for helping people to feed themselves and not feel like it's such a chore and a burden because of the labor and the time intensity that people often imagine when you're making food from scratch or making vegetarian or vegan cooking.
Absolutely. Well, we do a lot to encourage cooking in quantities because it doesn't take twice as long to make twice as big a batch. So then you get some efficiency there, and then you can also, you're kind of paying it forward for a stressed out moment later in the week or a gift to loved ones or family members. So I think cooking in quantity is really delightful and satisfying and efficient. But one of the things that gives you is leftovers. And sometimes leftovers have kind of got a bad rap as if they're second rate or something. I personally think it's like a gift from the past that makes my present better. But some people want to know how they can bring more luster and joy back to leftovers when they pull them out of the fridge, if they've had something a second or a third time. Any suggestions around that?
Sure. I want to speak to leftovers, but I just want to speak to the way that we interact with food and how we can stretch it out, if you will, as much as possible. I'll start by saying freeze things. When we get a loaf of bread, the first thing we do is we cut it into slices and then we freeze the majority of it because we know we're not going to eat it all that day. And if we let it sit on the counter for 1 or 2 days, it's going to be stale. There's still uses for stale bread or burnt toast, as my friend Cal Peternell talks about in his new cookbook, Burnt Toast and Other Adventures. But we freeze a lot. We freeze bread after slicing it. We typically make vegetable stock every week. because we use it not only for soups and stews, but anything that might require water. So say we're making, a grain dish, rice, quinoa, fonio, whatever it is, rather than using water, we'll use stock to add flavor. As I was talking about, building that flavor, creating that concentrated brilliance. And so we make a vat of vegetable stock, we cool it down, we transfer it to ice cubes, freeze those, and then we break the ice cubes open and put them in bags so that we have like these bite-sized pieces of or stock cubes that we can use throughout the week. When we get, someone gifts us a dish or something, and I mean, this was a practice we had when we had little kids, which I think is useful for parents out there. When we first had our kids, and people would often bring over food in support of the new parents feeding themselves home cooked meals, we'd immediately have it and then, freeze the rest because we know we could pull it out later. And that goes back to your point earlier about just being in the practice of cooking in bulk. For us, it's just one of the foundational principles of the way we cook. We always cook more than that meal requires, oftentimes with the eye towards freezing it, especially things that freeze well and thaw out well, because you have some things that freeze, but they don't thaw out that well. And so, and I have some tips and tools. My wife calls me the master rewarmer, but things like soups, things like stews, legumes, those are things that are like no brain. You can freeze them and they're going to be brilliant. In fact, they're probably going to be better because once you've allowed those flavors to concentrate and marry, they're going to be better than when that soup or stew is just off the stove. So yeah, I would say practicing that. And what else? This is something that we've been in the practice of lately, having a what do we call it, everything but the kitchen sink dinner. And so towards the end of the week, as we've been accumulating, leftovers, or, we've been working with vegetables, but we may have half of an ear of corn left or a couple of carrots from the bunch that we had. And so we try to, when we have time, sometimes it gets a little challenging with all the busyness of our kids' schedule, but we tap in to our daughters and ask them, well, how would you use that ear of corn and that, those carrots and the couple of tomatoes that we have in the garden? And we just come up with these inventive dishes that's really about spontaneity, creativity, using what's on hand. I will say that 90% of the time they work out brilliantly, but there is that 10% where you're just like, okay, well, we're actually going to just put this away and warm up pizza that we have.
Yes, my kids decided a little while back that they wanted to see what would happen if they made a dish that was based around mustard. And I'm not just talking about a condiment, I'm talking about like 50% mustard. And they claimed they enjoyed it, but I did not.
Fair enough. Yeah. One last thing, making soups and stews. I talked about soups and stews earlier, but there is, because vegetable soups and stews are kind of like, that's just a no-brainer as long as it's not overpowered with spices. If we have some cauliflower that we roasted and we enjoyed it for dinner one night and packed some in the girls' lunch the next day, we may still have some left over. And then, so in my mind, I'm like, why don't we make a pureed cauliflower soup using the cauliflower that's already cooked, that it's already flavorful because it's been sitting in the fridge for a day and all those spices and everything have married and concentrated. And then we add a little bit of the stock from our freezer, and we have this delicious, pureed cauliflower soup or carrot soup or whatever vegetable. So those are some of my best practices.
Nice, thank you. Mm-hmm. One other thing that can be kind of fun is you can mix and match various leftovers. Sometimes quinoa, legumes, different things, and try them in different combinations. Add a different green, and then sometimes baking them, even with just some tomato sauce over the top. Can create an interesting whole new flavor experience.
Definitely.
Yeah. Got a lot of questions from our members. So let's see if we can get to as many of these as we can. And we'll ask you to be kind of concise if you can, so we can hopefully get through a bunch of these.
I'll do it.
Martha said, I'm always looking for the greatest nutrition from my plant-based diet and struggle to know if I'm getting enough calcium and iron. Is it better to eat raw greens like spinach and kale to get the maximum iron and calcium available, or is cooking with lemon or sumac a better way to make them bioavailable?
I've heard a lot of different opinions on the bioavailability of nutrients and micronutrients when you're eating raw vegetables versus cooked. And what I've heard most often and what I feel works best for me is using or preparing vegetables that are lightly prepared, but somehow cooked a little bit. There are periods where I will eat raw foods just because I feel like my body needs a break from eating cooked foods and the energy that it takes to digest them. But yeah, like lightly steamed, blanched, lightly sauteed, and I think adding a little bit of acid along with your salt and maybe a little bit of heat won't hurt. So yeah, that's
Yeah.
where I've landed on that.
Thank you. One other thing I would add is that with things like spinach or kale that are so healthy, it's easier to eat more when they're cooked a little bit because they softens them and makes it easier to chew. And with something like kale, kind of like the more the better, frankly. I mean, obviously within limits, you can overdo anything, but we can eat way more kale than we are and thrive very well on that. So that's a place where, yeah, I mean, even if bioavailability is a little bit higher for a pound of raw kale than a pound of cooked, which one are you actually going to eat a pound of more readily? So factor that into your mind as well. So Martha also said, I'm making friends with multicultural tastes. Can you suggest your favorite plant-based entree using mushrooms?
Yeah. If I can reference my own books, I will say Vegan Soul Kitchen has this brilliant, and I often don't say that about my own recipes, but when I tested this one the first time, I literally cried. It tasted so delicious. It is seitan medallions and a mixed mushroom gravy. That mushroom gravy is delicious, and you can use it in a number of ways. Vegetable Kingdom, my last book, has a really tasty fried mushroom po' boy. And so we use, I think, maitake mushrooms, but it's a fun food. Obviously, you don't want to be eating fried foods every day, and you definitely don't want to be eating po' boys that often. But I lived in New Orleans, and I love bringing the culture and the flavors of New Orleans to the globe. So check that out.
All right, thank you. I have a feeling I know the answer to this one, but Martha also said, I'm definitely attracted by your cookbook titles. Do you have a suggestion for a gift for my Black sister-in-law?
Well, I will say that Vegetable Kingdom is a great entry point for people who are hoping to bring more plants into their diet. I would say give Black food, my forthcoming collection of recipes, art, and essays to every Black person you know. This is an important book, not just for the recipes, which are through line, but for the brilliant ideas and the multiple ways in which people are expressively, reflecting on Black foodways, from poetry to visual art. Check out Black food. But I will say this: it was a challenging decision for me as a chef and author to decide that I actually wanted to include animal products in Black food, which all my cookbooks before are, 100% vegan. But this one, I really wanted to be, I didn't want to be overly prescriptive in the way in which I invited the over 100 contributors throughout the Black diaspora to tell their story around food. And I encourage people to offer a plant-based offering, but also left it open for people to offer whatever they wanted. And so the majority of the recipes in Black food are vegetarian and vegan, but there are some animal products in there.
Got it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
One last question from Martha. Do you have suggestions on reducing gas with cruciferous vegetables, especially broccoli and cabbage, and any secrets to make them more digestible?
If I could patent the the solution to that, I'd be a billionaire and down with billionaires. We don't need any billionaires, but no, I wish I did, but I don't.
Okay, got it. Well, my top suggestion is with anything that gives you gas, start light, go slow, ease into it, see how much you can tolerate. Often it's the fiber that is one of the things that can cause gas when people aren't used to getting a lot of fiber. It actually gets a lot going in the microbiome and it can stimulate gas, among other things. That's a phase, it will pass. So if you have not been eating a lot of fiber and you start moving in, that's one of the things that legumes and cruciferous vegetables bring to the table, is a lot of fiber. So we do see that. Of course, there are other things that can cause gas in there as well, but that's one of them. And the key is slow and steady progress, easing in, starting with smaller amounts, seeing what your body can handle, and often it'll adjust over time. Jeanette said, I love cooking with lots of spices, both whole and ground, as well as herbs and aromatics like garlic, fresh ginger, and fresh turmeric. Could you tell us the best ways to bring out their flavors without using oil?
Yeah, great question. And I wasn't really even apprised of this practice of cooking without, well, I'll say cooking with water. I know some people try to avoid oil, but I have done a lot of work with the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, founded by Neil Barnard, medical doctor, and they have done some important research on plant-based diets, the ability to help ameliorate symptoms of many chronic illnesses, in some cases reversing chronic illnesses. And so I cook with water when I don't want to cook oil, and it works fine. I think there's this idea that if I want to cook onions, saute them or caramelize them, you have to have fat. And that's just not true. There are many cases where I will make an oil-free dish and I'm able to saute whatever aromatics or vegetables in water. I spoke to this earlier in terms of, you mentioned the spices. Try to use whole spices and grind them and toast them. I don't think I mentioned toasting. Toasting brings out the natural oils. And so, if you have whole spices, toast them and then grind them, and they're going to be, just have a lot of life. And then with fresh herbs, something that I found a lot of people, the mistake that I find that people often make is they add them too early. You want the fresh herbs to be fresh. You want to get that essence of freshness. And so the best thing is to add them right at the end of cooking your dish, and not add them too early where you're actually going to kind of nullify what they bring to the dish.
Oh, fabulous. Thank you. I'm salivating right now. Okay, another question coming from Jeanette. I love the flavors of the Caribbean as well as Asian, such as Korean and Thai. I don't see a whole lot of Caribbean recipes that don't have meat. Do you have any suggestions?
Well, I want to say before I forget, Joanne, I can't think of her name, but she goes by the Korean Vegan. She's huge on TikTok. She has like 1 million followers, and on Instagram as well. And her debut cookbook, I think it's called The Korean Vegan, is coming out in the fall, and her recipes are fantastic. So check that out if you are, as you mentioned, into Korean food. Caribbean food can be a little tough. I know that there was the Caribbean Vegan by this woman, Tamar Mason, who is a vegan. But I think that part of the fun and creativity of plant-based eating, for me at least, and what I want to encourage others to do is, look at cookbooks that may have a lot of animal products in there and think about how you can modify the dishes so that they work for you. I mean, it's something that was a cornerstone of my cookbook writing when I first started, because I was just trying to figure this out. And there weren't a lot of vegan cookbooks. There weren't as many as there are now. And so I would often have to reference books that had a lot of meat or animal products and think about how to, quote unquote, veganize them. So I know that there's the book Belly Full, which is one of the more recent Caribbean cookbooks. It's out of the UK. There's this Eat Caribbean book, which was published in 2005. And there's a more classic one, which is published in the mid 90s, the Sugar Meal Caribbean Cookbook by this woman, Jinx Morgan. So definitely check out a Caribbean Vegan, but, look at these other Caribbean cookbooks and think about how you can modify the recipes to make them work for you.
Great. Thank you. Patrizia asked, what do you suggest for the main meal's protein if being plant-based and grains are not easily digested?
Legumes, if you can digest them, tofu, tempeh. I have been reluctant to use a lot of the, seitan is something that I'll use occasionally, but not often. you know, at this point, you can go into supermarkets and find innumerable meat analogs.
Right.
I do want to say that I see those products as something that one might enjoy occasionally. They're fun if you have like, if you've mostly eaten a standard American diet and you're transitioning, or you're just having that craving for something that tastes like meat in the way that you're used to eating it, then those things I think are fine substitutes. But I would warn people to be careful about over consuming a lot of what I often call frankenfoods. I had a conversation with Frances Moore Lepay the other night about the 50th anniversary of her seminal book, Diet for a Small Planet. And we talked about this. And she brought up the great points that oftentimes these products lack a lot of fiber, you know, just in terms of like the kind of nutritional lens at looking at them. But I think the bigger issue with these tech and food companies, they're creating a lot of these products, is that there isn't a lot of transparency around what are we eating? What's
Right.
in these products? You know, and they
Yeah.
have whatever the proprietary you know, they talk about the proprietary nature of, because they don't want other people taking their idea. But I think as consumers, we deserve to know what we're eating. So that's my little
Yeah.
spiel on the plant-based meat products.
Yes. Thank you. I totally agree. You know, I think that humans have evolved over thousands of generations in relationship to their environment, and we have, what has withstood the test of time is the survivors and the surviving traditions.
Mhm.
And you know, when we introduce new things, you know, maybe some of them will be awesome, but the truth is we don't know. Like, we didn't evolve to eat some of this stuff. And so when you say frankenfoods, I was thinking, well, you know, once in a while, if we keep inventing Frankensteins, we'll get some creatures that turn out to be beneficent, right? But you don't know. So I tend to prefer to eat real whole foods, because that's what my body, I know it will benefit from. And there are so many studies showing the benefits of whole foods for human health. It's going to be a while before we've got studies showing the benefits of, you know, Beyond Burgers or Impossible Burgers. And if we do, it'll be in contrast to Big Macs and so forth, not in contrast to, you know, eating some tempeh or some, you know, some black-eyed peas. So, you know, I think we know pretty conclusively that whole legumes, for example, are going to be healthier. And so we just learned how to do what you're showing us, which is to make them delicious.
Yep.
Tracy asked, what are some tricks you've learned that might help people introduce more healthy plant-based foods to their friends and family in a pleasurable way? Are there any go-to crowd-pleasing recipes or other ideas you can share?
I'll say this: don't talk about it. I felt the need to announce to everyone that this is the vegan dish that's entering the table when I would go to family. Vegan. What I found to be most effective in helping family members, loved ones, people shift their habits and attitudes and politics regarding food is by serving them delicious food that because there's this perception that people still have that vegan food is bland, it's boring, it's all brown, and just there's nothing for me there. And one thing that I would often do at family gatherings is I would bring, I'll give you an example and then give you the dish that then you can use to hopefully influence your family to think differently about these. There was a family gathering, you know, this is like a decade or so ago. Went back home to visit my family. It was the summertime. We had a cookout, and there was the kind of typical bulk drowned in mayonnaise potato salad on the spread. And I decided to bring my roasted red potato with parsley pine nut pesto dish to the table. And that was kind of like my answer to potato salad that's drowned in mayonnaise. I'm going to make this like flavorful, creamy pesto and then roast the potatoes and toss that in it. And my mom came by and she asked me to go and, I don't know, run an errand for her. And when I came back, my potato salad was all gone. The other one had been lightly touched. And I know that if I would have come into the party feeling the need to label it vegan, that people would have probably stayed away from it. but they loved it, asked for the recipe. And that was one of the early examples that helped me kind of formulate this whole mantra around starting with the visceral. We can like, everyone isn't moved by heady intellectual lectures or riveting documentary films. Sometimes the most powerful way into people's spirit and soul is by feeding them. And I think with that intention of nourishing people with good food, I find that people, when I feed them good vegan meals, they ask me the questions. I don't have to do any proselytizing. After that, they're like, well, what did you use and how did you do this? So I'd say just like nail a couple of dishes that everybody from the meat eaters to the vegans would love, and then make that your mainstay to getting people more open to more plant-based foods.
Fabulous. Thank you. Okay. Two last questions here. First from Chelsea. What are the most important steps people can take to decolonize how food and recipes are discussed?
Oh shit, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
My computer's about to die. And okay.
Oh yeah, we'll pause right there.
Whew. Okay. I got it plugged in. Sorry about that. Okay. Sorry. Could you repeat that?
Okay, no worries. Okay, yeah, absolutely. Okay, here we go. All right. What are the most important steps people can take to decolonize how food and recipes are discussed?
Yeah, so I would say I think that people from the global majority here in the United States, we have to drown out the voices that either vilify or exoticize our foods. I think they're both problematic in different ways. And instead, I think we have to do the work to deepen our knowledge of and comfort with cooking our traditional foods. I think along with that, we have to figure out how we can reject the standard American diet. And I know that that's a complicated undertaking because of the realities that many people are living with, and the physical and economic and geographic barriers that people have for accessing healthful foods or culturally appropriate foods, and the overabundance of a lot of corporate processed and packaged foods. But I really think it's up to us, as I mentioned earlier, when I'm moving through the world hoping to educate people about the brilliance and diversity and complexity of African American cuisine. I'm very clear that I'm speaking to my people as well. And so I think that when we understand the powerful role that our traditional foods can play in healing us and helping us to thrive, I think that I hope that that's a catalyst for us really doing the work to embrace those foods. And I said this earlier, but I really want to encourage people to check out old ways, because wherever you're from in the world, they have tools and resources for helping folks think about reintegrating many of these foods into our modern diets.
Yes, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, one more question I've got to ask you, which is about improvisation. We all know that when you follow a recipe, it takes longer than something you've memorized or you're just in the flow, because you're like looking it up and then you're thinking about this and that and finding all the ingredients and maybe even have to do a little shopping. Whereas when you get really familiar with something, maybe you've made it 10 or 20 or 30 times, you're on autopilot and you can just whiz on through and you got all the ingredients at hand because you already knew what they were when you went shopping. But it's a journey. And as a cookbook author, among other things, you help give people a map so they can start to learn. And like any new skill, it takes time and energy and practice to develop it. And over time, you develop some mastery. Do you have any tips on how to move a little faster into the improvisational space for those people who maybe would like to feel more free and creative, but are really afraid of messing it up?
Yeah. I will start by saying that I always, and I may run myself out of business by saying this, but cookbooks should be a guide. I think that, for people who are novices in the kitchen or, unfamiliar with a particular culinary tradition, yeah, cookbooks make sense. They give you some of the foundational tools. I think the goal should be. The North Star should be improvisation, using what's on hand, just creatively flowing, in the tradition of like jazz improvisation, having a structure within your working and then just letting spirit move you. And I think the most important thing is developing a cooking practice. Maybe you can't do it every day, but having some regularity and, just working on foundational skills building tools and techniques. And the thing is, there's so many resources for learning these things now, from master classes to foundational books like The Joy of Cooking, or people who like Ottolenghi or myself, or Isa Chandra, who have these books that are about really giving you like these foundational recipes upon which you can build, all types of fun and creative meals. So I would say the most important thing about being in the kitchen is just feeling comfortable and feeling that confidence that, yeah, I don't need a recipe. I'm going to go out in my garden, or maybe even if it's a recipe, let me just say this, even if you have recipes that you're cooking from, don't see them as gospel. Like, see them as a guide. If you are cooking a recipe that calls for collard greens and you happen to be growing Swiss chard at home, feel free to swap out that leafy green instead of feeling the need to go out and then buy collard greens. And the same thing can be said for, different spices or, acids, lemon juice versus, apple cider vinegar versus champagne vinegar. I mean, there are ways in which you can just substitute so it makes sense for you and your family. And I want to encourage people to just, use recipes as a guide, but don't feel so wed to them that you're not just having fun and using what you already have instead of going out and feeling the need to buy something.
Fabulous. Thank you. Okay. Lastly, Brian, I want to ask you, what's your greatest hope for the future of food?
That's a great question. It's a big question.
Yes.
I will say, as of late, my greatest hope is that communities that have been historically marginalized understand that we have to create our own parallel institutions that are going to feed us and nurture us and ensure our not just survival, but that our communities are thriving. I think one of the lessons that I came out of 2020 learning is that late stage capitalism, the US government, America, these things aren't going to save us. And I think we should be keeping one eye on changing these realities, from the bottom up, but always keep an eye on how we can change public policies and laws to ensure equity and to ensure that regular everyday people are being taken care of and not just the wealthiest among us. And so that's the reality. But, the other reality is that people are dying, they're starving, they're hurting. And I think that we have to work towards creating solutions in our communities so that no matter what's happening outside the community, we're taking care of each other. And I think that's one of the cornerstones. No, I don't think. I know one of the cornerstones of food justice activism is that the problems that are impacting people in historically marginalized communities are owned. The solutions to the problems are owned and driven by those most impacted by the issues. That doesn't mean some, philanthropic institution with billions of dollars. It doesn't mean, an NGO that's snow-capped with people who don't come from communities, but are working in communities and argue that they know what's best for the communities. People in communities, they are aware of the problems that they're dealing with. They're aware of the different ways in which they've been historically and contemporary marginalized. And a lot of people have brilliant solutions. And a lot of people are already on the ground doing the work. This whole idea of a food desert where you look in and there's nothing. I mean, one, we know deserts are thriving ecosystems, but this idea that these communities are like barren is just untrue. People have been doing the work for decades around like feeding people, around preserving traditional foods, canning, pickling, preserving, you name it. I think what needs to happen is we need to ensure that resources and power are shifted in the communities so that people on the ground, the least among us, can actually have everything they need to transform their reality.
Yeah, thank you for that. Detroit, Michigan has been called a food desert. It's also the community garden capital of the United States. There are over 1,000 community gardens in Detroit city limits.
Yep.
So sometimes in response to challenging crisis, people create opportunity and breakthroughs. And by focusing on learning from the best of us, sometimes growing out of the worst of us, growing out of persecution and violence and injustice, we find the longing for justice. We find the creativity of the human spirit. We find human dignity that against all odds perseveres and thrives. And I think that's part of the hope for humanity.
Yes.
So, Bryant, I want to thank you so much. We've been talking here with Bryant Terry, best-selling author, activist, educator, editor. You should definitely, if you've been inspired by what you've heard today, check out his books, get them for yourself, give them to everyone you love. Vegetable Kingdom, Vegan Soul Kitchen, Afro Vegan, and soon to be released Black Food. Bryant, thanks so much for all that you do and for sharing your time with us today.
Thank you for having me on, Ocean. Thank you, everyone, for listening in. And I wish you nothing but good health and good cooking.
Let's do this. When it comes to cancer, Alzheimer's, diabetes, heart disease, and other chronic illness, what really matters isn't how many books you read, how many webinars you attend, or how much you know. What really matters at the end of the day is what you eat and how you live. The science has given us what we need to know. Now it's time for action. It's time to implement and optimize your healthy lifestyle. It's time to get results. It's time to say goodbye to confusion and hello to clarity. It's time to say goodbye to bad habits and hello to good ones. It's time to fall in love with foods that love you back. It's time to join a community that will support you in achieving your goals. It's time for Whole Life Club. Click the link to find out more and to join in now.